Hi, Paul here from the future. Well, not like your future, but like future in relation to the past Paul that you're about to hear in this episode. Technically, I'm a past Paul, but like a more recent to your present past Paul. Anyway, I'm interrupting my own first two episodes to share just a little bit of a caveat. These episodes are produced together, and while in format they resemble the other episodes, they're much more of a discussion and exploration into solo RPGs than they are like an actual play recording. Feel free, of course, to continue to listen to these. You get some background on why I made the decisions in the first couple episodes of my actual play that I did, what rule system I'm kind of using. It hasn't been really impactful, I'll say, and I ended up changing the rules anyways. Regardless, if you're looking to kick off the actual play, you're welcome to skip ahead to episode 3 and then listen forward from there. I'm going to return you momentarily here to the original timeline of causal events in which I talk about like bells or something. I don't know. I was going for like a vibe and so innocent back then. Thanks for listening, as always, giving me a shot, and we'll talk again soon in like about, 6-7 seconds. The legend says that Brown was not the first person to get lost in the Stillwood, but another man entered its wood labyrinth hundreds of years before. Time doesn't work in the Stillwood the same way it does outside of it, and the longer you're trapped, the longer it seems, even if you've only been gone a few days in the real world. That first victim became a permanent part of the Stillwood. He never found his way back home and should have starved to death, but the Stillwood wouldn't let its king die, so it slowed his heart to a crawl along with the rest of him. They say it beats once per day, and that he can't move more than a foot in an hour. When he's alone, that is. His clothes are ragged and torn, and he looks more like a bone-white cadaver than a man. He screams and cries for help, but no one outside can hear him, and over the centuries his screams have become silent. As he stalks among the dead leaves in exhaustion, praying for death to come, the Stillwood becomes a little more part of him. His blood is creek water and moss, and his skin is the color of mushroom caps. They say if you ever find yourself in the Stillwood, you have to be careful where you look. You see, the fact that no one sees him is what disconnected the Stillwood King from the normal passage of time. An excerpt from A Visitor's Guide to Ichor Falls, specifically the short story The Stillwood King by Chris Straub. Hello, welcome to episode 2. Episode 2 of what? Well, and of who? And of why? Well, of who am I? I am the party, and that's what you're listening to. In the second episode, I thought that I'd continue the discussion about what my plans were, probably not actually kicking off the actual play aspect of the podcast, but just to continue to talk and fill in some gaps. I do want to talk a little bit about that excerpt, that snippet of the short story. It's really not much longer than what I read, but I didn't want to give away the whole thing, and I think it's definitely worth reading. Ichor Falls, if you're not familiar with that, how to describe it? It is a collection of short horror stories by Chris Straub, who, if you know him for anything, you know him for Candle Cove. Candle Cove is definitely his most famous work. He also has produced some really fantastic short, creepy as all out, analog horror films or short films for YouTube. He's definitely worth checking out across the board. I know he's did a webcomic for many years, maybe still, I don't know. His horror stuff, I'm a huge fan. And I thought The Stillwood King was actually a really, really great example of what can we do to turn something regular, normal, something that we have almost passingly looked beyond in our adventuring in the role-playing game world, the wilderness itself. Let's not ignore it. Let's think about that. I like the Stillwood King because that idea at the end there that, you know, he's not moving, he's frozen in time, like the forest that he's in. He's a creature. I don't even say creature might not even be the right word. He's a living being. He's an entity within the forest. It's revealed just a little bit after what I read that if you make eye contact with him, if you acknowledge him, if you can see like, hey, he is not just a feature. He's not just another tree. He might look like a tree, much like an ent. He's something here. He's something that can stalk you. It isn't until you just take a moment to look around, lock eyes with him, that he comes alive. I think looking to my own goals for my role-playing game, it's to take those mundane things like just the trees that surround you in the woods. Think about how you make a story out of it. How do you build up from there? That's really my goal, and I think that's the appeal for me for solo role-playing, is to take the things that I'm interested in, take the fun, what seems like fun to me or what seems interesting, aspects of a role-playing game, and just diving right in. The Stillwood King. One of the things I didn't mention in my first episode, which I was kind of really regretting that I didn't include it in there, but I thought, hey, there's going to be time in the future for some exploration of this. There is a book that really kickstarted this for me, this whole journey of actually jumping in and just giving it a shot. And that's the Solo Game Master's Guide. It's published by Modifius, and it's by Geek Gamers, the YouTube channel. Recommend it. It's a YouTube channel that's been running for quite some time. If you're interested in solo role-playing, it's got some great examples, great discussion, better stuff than what you're going to hear. Better stuff than what you're going to hear here, as evidenced by my fumbling of my words. That book really encouraged me to just jump in. My goal is to take the philosophy that was presented in there, that everything is play. Every aspect of what you're doing whether or not you're rolling dice, you're planning, you're thinking about, you're creating house rules, recording a podcast, and just musing off the top of your head, off of a loose outline, that's all play. And so that got me motivated to just jump in and take a dungeon, take a shot at it, and just be like, you know what, I'm just going to read through this dungeon and start putting together some characters, get a backstory going, and it's been really fun. I've probably been into the story in my own head for about a half hour total, but I've spent hours outside of that just thinking about what my own experience can look like, why I want to do this in the first place, but also what's going to actually keep me going. And the idea of recording a podcast, whether or not anyone's listening, the idea of speaking out loud while I play, it seems rewarding. That brings us to today. What I wanted to talk about is my squad of characters that I put together. This is going to be a work in progress. Everything's going to be a work in progress, to be honest. I put together some pretty rudimentary character creation rules. I mentioned in my first episode that the Black Hack was quite a large inspiration for me. There's another system that was, I guess at this point, kind of 50-50 inspiration between the Black Hack. This other system that I don't know why I'm keeping it a secret. It's suspenseful. Keep listening to find out. But this other system, Fate Accelerated Edition, is I think just gonna mesh well. I'm hoping. I'm crossing my fingers on that. The idea here is that when I rolled up my characters, I decided on 4 just because it seemed like a good number, good easy number of characters for me to keep track of, but then also to have some interesting inter-party relationships and interactions as well. The background for my game, as it evolved, I was thinking about what do I want to do and my inspirations, what kind of stories I'm excited about in the world of fantasy. It's going to give me good exposure to testing some rules out within just a sample dungeon that I can pick up. And so I ended up creating a squad, a sort of military, paramilitary-like squad of characters. The inspiration really comes from my favorite fantasy series of all time, the Malazan Book of the Fallen, and there are Malazan Marines that are in that. And those characters are beloved to me. If you've read The Black Company, Malazan is directly influenced by The Black Company. It's kind of generationally passed down to what you're hearing today. To me, I wanted a little bit of a different name, so I came up with this concept of the Stewards being kind of a cult of rangers, not exactly priestly or monk-like, a warrior cult who trains individuals to go out into the wilds and try to reestablish lanes of civilization from one village to the next. I guess this also, as I've been thinking about this more and more, it's really influenced by the fact that I came into role-playing games right when D&D 4th edition was launching. My first real campaign of any sort that I ran was Star Wars Saga Edition, and that was immediately followed by 4th edition, and my friends and I were really excited about it. Well, the reason I bring it back to that is because 4th edition had really strong emphasis on a points of light setting, kind of default setting for D&D. And that's the idea that it is a fallen world, it's a dark world, there's a lot of bad stuff out there, a lot of dangers just around every corner, around every tree, down every path. Any village, any little point of civilization, that's your point of light. The characters are really in the world and in the story to help protect those points of light. And in my case, with the stewards, their plan is to try to not just protect, but connect, reestablish some semblance of a loose civilization out there in what I call the Greater Eastern Wilds. And that's a point where I don't have much of a map laid out, but I just have this imagery of a large landscape just east of a huge mountain range, where it's limited travel across the mountain range. And to the west, you have established civilization. You have maybe a kingdom or an empire of some sort. So once you cross over these mountains, you're into the greater eastern wilds, and it's a dangerous place to be. That brings us to the characters again, or brings us back to the characters, I should say. My plan was to give myself think about what things I needed to give myself for each of my characters to help the story move along and to help give me some things I can sink my teeth into, but also not give too much detail. The combination of Fate Accelerated Edition and then also using the Black Hack usage die primarily, I think that's going to give me a lot of freedom when I actually play. To roll up my characters, I had, as I said, 4 characters established. And the first thing I rolled up was a D20 motivation table, which cobbled together for myself. Then once each character had a basic motivation, some examples are empowerment, revenge, grief, community, growth, love. Once I had that for each character, I then rolled to see what their 2 main stats or approaches would be. And so this is, again, pulling from Fate Accelerated Edition. So I used their 6 approaches: careful, clever, flashy, forceful, quick, and sneaky. For each character, I rolled a d6 because there's 6 different approaches, and I just rolled that twice. Their first stat that I rolled, that was their primary stat. The second stat that I rolled was their secondary stat. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that actually means for primary and secondary. Here's another inspiration. I think it's Cairn the RPG. I don't have that in front of me right now, but I know that's not the only rule set. A lot of OSR rule sets use gear slots as far as keeping track of that. I'm not an encumbrance guy or tracking arrows by any means kind of guy. So I just gave each character 10 gear slots, 1 for each of their hands, 2 spots on their body for like easy access, and then 6 for stowage, like on a backpack or rucksack. So that's the default that I gave all of them. Gave them all rations. Rations has been abstracted out as well using the usage die. One of the bigger things that I had is that I rolled for their squad role. So each steward is trained in a specialty area. I just identified quickly 8 squad roles. So chaplain, squad fist, squad mage, sapper, scout, sergeant, skirmisher, and stalker. And again, I rolled a d8 for each of my characters. If I had any repeats, I re-rolled because I don't want any redundancy or I don't know. It might be interesting to have 2 mages in a squad, but I wanted to try out just having 4 different types of resources across my characters. So once I rolled that, I also had some starting gear that each of the characters, based off of their role, that they had added to their gear slots. That was pretty much all the main aspects of my characters. I'm looking at them. Ended up with picking a steward name, which is more like a nickname, a military nickname, something that they probably earned one way or another through their training as a steward. Once I had that, picked their pronouns, and I'd be good to go. Those are the aspects of my characters. Who are my characters? Well, I ended up start with Sarge. And Sarge is both the character's nickname and incidentally, or not incidentally, their role. I don't have a more specific name for Sarge yet. I also don't have more specific pronouns than they, them. I'm kind of leaving that open for the time being. But with Sarge, so being the sergeant, they already have local area maps and orienteering tools in their gear, as well as their options of weapons, because they're kind of like more of a jack of all trades type of character. So I gave my sergeant a 2-handed longsword because it sounded cool. In addition to that, all of the stewards have the same basic standard hardened boiled leather armor, some type of cloak. I'm thinking maybe a maroon or something like that, or faded maroon or even faded gray, like in Sarge's case, because Sarge has been traveling the wilds for a while. Maybe has a better idea of what's out there, a little bit older. My second character that I rolled up, her name is Sax, Sacks, as in sacks of gold. Oh, I forgot to mention, sorry, before I go on to Sax, Sarge's motivation, I ended up rolling order, which I thought was kind of neat. I think that makes sense if you're going to be the leader of a squad that goes out into the wilds. Just so happened that Sarge values order. That's their motivation. Sax, her motivation was grief, which I was really excited actually to roll that up for Sax. I began, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in detail, I began to develop kind of like a backstory of the squad as I rolled up their motivations, what things they were good at, what their roles were, what roles I didn't have in the squad. That was really interesting too, to think, I could have up to 8 different characters in my squad, but I only have 4. So why are we only at half strength? That's something else that's kind of, well, I hope to explore at least through play. So her motivation is grief at being, let's see, what did I roll for Sax? I rolled a skirmisher. So skirmishers get 2 one-handed weapons, so 1 slot for each hand, and then is also a throwing weapon, can be salvaged most of the time. And what I mean by most of the time is at the end of each fighting scene or each time that the throwing weapon is used, I'll assign some usage die to it to see if it's kind of getting mangled up or needs repairs or whatever. The skirmisher doesn't really have any other role-specific gear, but I just kind of fashion it off of a character who jumps into the midst of things, maybe throws a throwing axe before and into the goblin pack, and then brings down her 2 hatchets or 2 short swords or something like that in a whirlwind, a dervish-like attack. Sax's main approach that I rolled up was quick, and then she has sneaky as a secondary. Tall's, her motivation was survival, also a very good roll when you're out in the wilderness and exploring the wilds. For her, I rolled up a squad mage, actually, which was like, oh, okay, all right, I got some magic in the party. That's cool. Being the squad mage, this world that I'm imagining, I'm starting to create, is very fluid with the magic. The magic system is really more of an art than a science. By default, in her inventory, we have scrolls, we have magical charms. I went with just kind of boring traditional weaponry as far as a mage or wizard goes, so she has a staff that takes up 2 hand slots. And then for her approaches, quick was her main approach, and then flashy was her secondary approach. And I was excited for those 2 for a mage. I think that's really interesting. I think we have someone who is at times subtle, at times flashy, as the approach would indicate. It is maybe not so much like I cast fireball at every problem that I see. It may be more of a clever, sneaky mage and wizard than like the powerful, like, shoots lightning bolts from their fingertips. And then for the 4th and final squad member, I have Deadlock, and his motivation that I rolled up was power, and I thought that was cool too. I'm like, I loved all 4 motivations. I was like, this is giving me, I don't know if I could have rolled bad ones. Essentially, this is giving me some exciting things to play around with, because none of the motivations are the same either. So they all have their own personal things that they're leaning towards. As the scout of the squad that I rolled up for Deadlock, he has a traditional longbow, which takes both hands to shoot, as well as a quiver attached to his body. And then he also has stowed on his body a spyglass, so he can see great distances easily. I actually see having a scout and a sergeant in the same squads. The sergeant's got those orienteering tools, local maps. The scout's got the spyglass. Like, I feel like I'm gonna do really well in the woods, basically, if I need to play out some travel. And my characters are gonna be pretty aware of their surroundings, I think. That's one thing that they'll have going for them as a squad. Let's see. And then as far as approaches go, primary approach for Deadlock was sneaky, and the secondary approach was clever. Those were great. I did forget, I don't know, I just kind of blew through Sarge. Sarge's primary, going back to my first character here, primary approach is careful, and their secondary approach is clever. So I got a couple of clever people in the squad. I think there's going to be, there's more of a finesse style of play overall that I'm seeing. Well, first of all, I didn't roll up any squad role like Fist or Stalker. Those are like kind of the 2 more fighty, shooty, strikery kind of squad roles in my head. I didn't roll up anyone that uses forceful as either of their approaches. I thought that was interesting that my squad ended up not having a forceful character whatsoever, so they're not just be breaking down doors left and right. Finally, I decided to try this out. So I rolled kind of just for the squad itself, some of these same things. So for the motivation of the squad, rolled on the same table, and I rolled fear. And I was really excited about that also. I didn't intentionally have fear be 13 on the D20 result, but just lucked out that was kind of neat. It's on there, so I'm keeping it. I think it's interesting now that I have this idea that the squad as a whole, they're afraid of something. There's fear when they're collectively working towards a goal. Fear is maybe that driving force for them overall as a unit. I'm not attaching anything to these next 2 things that I rolled up for them, but I did roll like a kind of primary and secondary approach that maybe the squad uses overall. And again, primary approach I rolled for sneaky, secondary approach I rolled for clever. So it just kind of reinforces, I guess, what I think of as what these 4 individuals, how they kind of operate as a whole, as a unit. One of the other things is that in addition to your approaches that you have for each character, their squad role itself also is a stat. And so continuing my trend of just stealing from all the games that I really like and I'm interested in, Mouse Guard, Burning Wheel by extension, but I never played Burning Wheel. I'm just a Mouse Guard fan. The RPG has a stat for characters and NPCs like of nature, and that's like their nature of whatever type of creature they are. And so Mouse Guard's like a Redwall kind of situation where mice are the heroes in a world where everything is bigger than them. They have mouse nature. It's in their nature. Whatever is in their nature as a mouse, sometimes you can roll that stat. And so I was like, well, that's very handy, and it makes sense to be a good catch-all. How light this system is that I'm working with. I think just having another good, like, let's use an example. Deadlock, who has a scout stat by virtue of being the scout role. Sometimes if Deadlock's trying to do something that is more applicable to his training or his skill set as a scout, I could roll for that versus like sneaky or clever. Now, right now, Deadlock as a primary sneaky has a D8 in sneaky, and then all of the squad rolls start as a D8 as well. Why do I care about that? They're both D8s. The stats are the same. Why would I use either one? Well, the main thing, if you haven't noticed yet, I don't have hit points. I don't have hardly anything. Hardly anything to like track or keep track of. Instead, going back to that good old Black Hack 2nd edition, I'm using the usage die mechanic as their stats. And so when I said both sneaky and scout for Deadlock have a D8, that means that if I'm trying to do something in a scene and Deadlock's the one who's doing it and he has a sneaky approach to it, well, then I roll a D8. And if it's anything other than a 1 or a 2, it's a success. Anything above a 2 on my dice are going to be a success. Anytime a 1 or 2 shows up, not only is that a failure for the character and what they're attempting to do, it also drops the die one size, kind of showing fatigue, loss of stamina, wear and tear. Not only do I fail, but my future ability is also reduced from a D8 to a D6, at least until I rest or get some healing or get a motivational speech, whatever. There's going to be conditions where I can heal up, but that's the idea, is that's going to be the main limiting factor of how far into a dungeon my squad can go, is that their stats, their stamina is going to decrease over time. And once I hit D4, I can continue to roll D4 for their approaches, not for the roll. Once I hit a D4 and I fail that for a roll, you've extended all your experience, all your special tricks and tips as the squad scout. You've used them up, and you gotta get some rest to kind of recuperate those. Your approaches, you're sneaky, you're clever, you're quick. You can continue to roll D4 on those at any time, but you're at 50-50 odds at that point. And every time you fail in a D4, it's going to hurt. To continue to push, it's possible, but it's really going to exhaust the party overall. That's the basics of how my characters look right now. Like I said, not a lot to them. One of my goals was to think of, I'm going to have 4 characters to juggle. I'm also going to have a dungeon to read. I have this microphone in front of my face. I have to be thinking in real time, be creative in real time. All of that is challenging on its own. So I didn't want to have like full D&D 5th edition 4 character sheets, or even Dungeon Crawl Classics 4 character sheets sitting in front of me trying to like keep track of mighty blows or spell slots or all that kind of fun stuff. So for me, I had to really simplify it. But I'm really excited. I feel like my party is ready to be tested. I'm really interested to see how it's going to feel to do the social interactions with myself, I guess, between the 2 characters. I don't know. It'd be interesting to see if dialogue kind of comes out, or if I just end up describing the interaction, whatever that might be. So more to come. As I said, I wasn't planning on getting into the actual play as far as like dungeon exploration, but just talking about this, just to bring it back to what I was saying about the solo game master's guide. This is play. This is what I consider to be play, and it is fun. It's like I'm thinking of the backstory, and I'm thinking of how do they exist in this world, in this space. And I enjoy it. That's good enough for me. That counts as play. Final thing before I hang it up for this episode is that my thoughts and my imaginings about this squad is that they've lost someone recently. They had a 5th, maybe even more, but really just recently they just lost their 5th member. Not sure which squad role it was. I know, and it's intentionally really easy to roll up a new squad member. So I may end up doing that at some point, of just rolling up to see. It doesn't always have to be random for me. The other side of rolling up randomly and not rolling randomly is I kind of like the idea that maybe it's the chaplain, their squad chaplain that they lost, because that would be the equivalent of like a cleric or a priest, counselor, therapist, and just the idea that you lose the one person who you need most to help heal the loss itself. You don't have that person who that's the person you need is the person you lost. I just think that's rough. That's rough, but that's potential for interesting story. And I want to tie that loss somehow into that idea that the squad's motivation is fear. I don't know if it's fear related to that loss. Maybe they're being hunted or chased by something, a bigger power. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, because that sounds like planning a campaign and setting myself up for failure and tears that I never get that far. I think there's enough to fear out in the world where fear being a motivation for the squad it's a good place to start from. In the future, next up, I'm hoping to not just talk about, but talk about the dungeon a little bit that I want to use, whether it's a Dungeon Crawl Classics, one of their shorter dungeons. I also have a hard copy of the Trilemma Adventures, I believe it's called. Tons and tons of like one-page dungeons. That might be a really good place for me to consider starting, just as more of a test bed for my game mechanics, see how it feels, see how this feels to record those play sessions. We'll see. I'm gonna look around a little bit on my bookshelf again, go shopping over there across the room, see what I got. If you're listening, I appreciate it very, very much, and we'll talk again soon.